happens when a simple favor turns into a secret romance. I thought I was just house-sitting for my best friend's family, nothing more. But when his father came home unexpectedly, the air shifted. The walls of that quiet house began to whisper a different story. This isn't just another BL webtoon moment. This is a yaoi manhwa love story about timing, temptation, and the one person I never expected to fall for. It all started at the beginning of summer break. My name is Alex, 19 years old, a college sophomore, juggling more part-time jobs than I could ever really handle. My life, up until then, had been a blur of coffee shop shifts, tutoring sessions, and late nights staring at textbooks that refused to make sense. I wasn't the kind of person who expected excitement, not in real life anyway. My idea of luxury was having an entire day with nothing scheduled, no manager breathing down my neck, no professors assigning another essay, no customers snapping their fingers like I was invisible. So when my best friend Ryan asked me for a favor, I thought he was joking at first. House-sitting, I repeated, staring at him across the worn-out diner table where we always hung out after classes. Ryan grinned, the kind of grin that usually meant he was about to dump some impossible task on me. But this time, it wasn't homework help or moving furniture. Yeah, my family's going to Europe for the whole summer. You'd have the place to yourself, big house, empty, free food, no one to bother you. Come on, Alex, it's perfect for you. At first, I hesitated. Staying in someone else's house felt weird, like trespassing, even with permission. But then I thought about my tiny dorm room, the leaky faucet that never stopped dripping, the paper-thin walls that carried every sound of my roommates' late-night video calls. Compared to that, a whole house to myself sounded like a dream. A whole house, I said slowly, raising a brow. Ryan leaned forward like he was selling me the world's greatest deal. 3 bedrooms, huge kitchen, living room with a TV bigger than me. Oh, and a pool in the backyard. I nearly choked on my soda. A pool, Ryan smirked. Yeah. You'll thank me when you're lying out in the sun while the rest of us are stuck working summer jobs. So, what do you say? It felt like something straight out of a romance manga setup, the kind where the protagonist stumbles into a situation too good to be true, only for something unexpected to happen. Of course, I didn't know it then, but this was the beginning of my story. The day I arrived at Ryan's place, the summer heat had already settled over the city like a heavy blanket. Cicadas buzzed from the trees, the air shimmered above the pavement, and my shirt clung uncomfortably to my back by the time I dragged my suitcase up the front steps. Ryan's family house was bigger than I remembered. 3 floors, cream-colored walls, a yard lined with hedges trimmed so perfectly they looked fake. The kind of place that screamed wealthy, but tasteful. I couldn't help but feel a little out of place as I fumbled with the key Ryan had pressed into my palm the night before. The lock clicked, and the door swung open to reveal cool air and the faint smell of polished wood. I stepped inside and just stood there. The silence hit me first. No noisy neighbors, no clatter of dishes from a crowded kitchen. Just a stillness so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. My dorm never sounded like this. Guess this is home for the summer, I whispered to myself, almost afraid my voice would echo. Dropping my bag, I wandered from room to room. The living room had a massive couch, the kind that looked like it could swallow you whole. A flat-screen TV hung on the wall, gleaming like a promise of endless late-night movie marathons. The kitchen looked like it belonged in one of those cooking shows, all stainless steel and marble counters. I opened the fridge and nearly laughed. Stocked, completely stocked. Ryan hadn't been exaggerating. There was enough food in there to feed me for weeks. "Okay, Ryan," I muttered, shaking my head. "Maybe you did do me a favor." Upstairs, the guest room was already prepared for me. Fresh sheets, neatly folded towels, a desk by the window overlooking the backyard pool. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had space, room to breathe. The first few days passed in a strange mix of freedom and unease. I woke up whenever I wanted, cooked whatever I felt like, and sprawled across the couch without worrying about someone stealing the remote. At night, I'd sit by the pool with my laptop, the glow of the screen reflecting off the water, cicadas humming in the background. It was quiet, peaceful, and yet something about it didn't feel real. Maybe it was because I wasn't used to silence, or maybe because deep down I was waiting for the twist, the part where the peace shattered. Because that's how stories like this always go, right? One night, I couldn't sleep. The air was heavy, thick with humidity, and the sheets clung to my skin no matter how many times I turned over. Frustrated, I gave up and padded downstairs to the kitchen for a glass of water. That's when I heard it, the faint sound of a door opening. I froze. It wasn't the front door. At least, I didn't think so. More like the sound of someone moving around inside the house. My heart slammed against my ribs as I set the glass down too quickly, the soft clink against the counter sounding like a gunshot in the silence. Had Ryan's family come back early? No, he would have told me, which left only two possibilities. Either my imagination was playing tricks on me, or someone else was in the house. Slowly, I stepped toward the living room, every nerve in my body on edge. The shadows stretched long across the floor, and for a second, I thought I saw movement, tall, broad-shouldered, pausing at the edge of the hallway. My breath caught, and then he stepped into the light. A man, not Ryan, not anyone I recognized. He was older, maybe mid-30s, maybe early 40s, with sharp features, a jawline dusted with stubble, and eyes that flicked toward me with a mix of surprise and something unreadable. His presence filled the room in a way that made the air feel thicker, heavier. I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice. Who are you?" The man blinked, then let out a soft, almost amused huff. "Shouldn't I be asking you that?" His voice was low, steady, carrying a quiet authority that made me straighten instinctively. I gripped the back of the couch like it might anchor me. I'm Alex, Ryan's friend. I'm house-sitting while they're away." For a beat, silence stretched between us. Then slowly, his expression shifted, the faintest trace of recognition sparking in his eyes. "Alex," he repeated, as though testing the name. "So you're the one." "The one?" Before I could ask what he meant, he stepped closer, and the dim light caught the edge of his smile. "I'm Ryan's father." That single sentence changed everything. All the comfort I'd felt over the past few days twisted into a knot of confusion and unease. Because Ryan had told me his family was away. He hadn't said anything about his dad staying behind, and standing there, face to face with the man, I realized two things at once. First, Ryan had definitely left out a very important detail, and second, his dad was nothing like I'd imagined. Ryan's family house wasn't just big, it was picture perfect. Tall windows, warm wooden floors, and a backyard that stretched further than any apartment kid like me could imagine. I moved in with my textbooks, a week's worth of snacks, and zero expectations. At first, it was calm. I studied, played music too loud, lounged around like it was my own place. But BL stories don't start with calm. They start with accidents, with unexpected twists. 3 days into house sitting, I heard the front door unlock. My heart froze. Ryan's family wasn't supposed to be back yet. That's when I saw him. Mr. Carter, Ryan's dad. The last time I'd seen him, years ago, in passing, he was just another working parent, always in business suits, always with a phone glued to his ear, briefcase in hand, barely more than a shadow moving through Ryan's house. Back then, he was a figure in the background, someone distant and untouchable. But the man standing in the doorway that night was nothing like that ghost of memory. His eyes looked tired, like he'd been carrying the weight of too many sleepless nights. His sleeves were rolled up to the elbows, veins tracing strong lines across his forearms. His shoulders seemed broader now, heavier, like the world had pressed down on them too long. He wasn't polished, he was raw, and raw was dangerous. "Alex?" His voice broke through the thick silence, rough, surprised but steady. "What are you doing here?" I realized I'd been staring too long. My throat tightened and words stumbled out clumsy and awkward. I'm house sitting for Ryan. He asked me, said your family was traveling. I didn't know you'd be here." His gaze sharpened, unreadable, lingering on me, as though weighing every word. Then, with a slow, measured nod, he set his bag down on the floor beside the couch. The sound echoed in the quiet house, like a gavel striking wood. "I see," he said finally. And just like that, the fragile sense of peace I'd built during the past few days cracked. I expected him to scold me, to tell me I had no right to be there, to send me packing back to my dorm with nothing but my suitcase and embarrassment. But instead, he simply loosened the first 2 buttons of his shirt, let out a heavy sigh, and sank into the armchair across from me, as if I was the guest, and he had simply come home to his own living room. For a while, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the hum of the refrigerator and the faint buzz of cicadas outside. I shifted uneasily, feeling the weight of his presence press against me like gravity. Finally, he looked at me again. "Ryan never mentioned this," I swallowed. "Yeah, he probably thought it wasn't a big deal." His hum carried something I couldn't read. Not disapproval, not anger, but something else. A heaviness, maybe, or curiosity. I forced a small laugh, desperate to break the tension. "I guess I should have asked first. Sorry if I'm intruding." His lips curved, not into a smile exactly, but something close. "You're not intruding. If Ryan trusts you here, then that's enough." The words should have been reassuring. But the way he said them, low, deliberate, with eyes that lingered too long, left my stomach twisting in ways I couldn't name. That's how it began. Not with fireworks, not with confessions whispered under starlight, just with silence, with a man I barely knew sitting across from me, his presence filling a house that suddenly felt too small. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, listening to the faint sounds of movement from downstairs, the clink of glass, the creak of floorboards, the low murmur of his voice on a phone call. Every sound reminded me I wasn't alone anymore, and for reasons I couldn't explain. That realization sent my heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with fear. The days that followed blurred into something strange. He was there when I came down for breakfast, sleeves rolled up, shirt untucked, brewing coffee in the kitchen like it was the most natural thing in the world. He was there when I drifted by the pool with a book, his shadow stretching long across the water as he stepped outside to smoke a cigarette. Sometimes we spoke, sometimes we didn't. But every time our eyes met, even briefly, It felt like an invisible thread tugged between us, pulling tighter. The world outside seemed to shrink away. It wasn't just Ryan's dad anymore. He wasn't just a parent I barely knew. He was him, the man who carried himself with quiet strength, who looked at me like he saw more than I was willing to admit, who turned the silence between us into something heavy and electric. And I found myself thinking, too often, too dangerously, about things I shouldn't. I didn't know what this was. A coincidence, a mistake, or the beginning of something I couldn't stop even if I wanted to. Because when he said my name, just once, softly, like a secret, it didn't sound like Ryan's friend anymore. It sounded like something else, something forbidden, something I was already falling into. Me, a college kid in over his head. Him, a man carrying secrets behind his silence. It wasn't supposed to mean anything. Just two people stuck in the same house for a week. But BL Manoir stories have their own logic. Proximity creates tension, silence hides questions, and sometimes forbidden attraction grows where it shouldn't, softly. This was one of those times. The first days were awkward. We tiptoed around each other like strangers, even though I'd eaten dinner at his table countless times. But there's a difference between being my friend's dad and being just a man in the same house. Mornings were the worst, not because of the silence or the lingering heaviness of the summer heat, but because of him. I'd shuffle into the kitchen in sweats, hair a mess, still half dreaming of unfinished assignments and alarm clocks that never rang. I expected solitude, the way it had been in the first few days. But he was always there, already awake, already composed, sitting at the counter with a steaming mug of coffee, glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, newspaper folded neatly at his side like something out of a lifestyle magazine. His presence filled the room more than the scent of roasted beans ever could. It was infuriating in its own way, how someone could look so effortlessly put together at a time of day when I could barely string together a sentence. "Want some?" he asked one morning, lifting the pot with one hand and sliding it in my direction with the other. His voice was calm, unhurried, as though this ritual was natural for him, as though we'd done it 100 times before. I froze, caught between the sharp scent of caffeine and the sharper awareness of his eyes on me. Yeah, thanks." My voice came out rough, cracking slightly, betraying the fact that I'd barely woken up. I reached for the mug he offered, and that's when it happened. His fingers brushed mine, just for a second, just a whisper of contact, but it was enough. The touch sent a jolt through me, subtle but undeniable, like static electricity sparking under my skin. My chest tightened, my breath caught, and suddenly the room wasn't just filled with the smell of coffee anymore. It was filled with him. I pulled my hand back too quickly, sloshing a bit of the coffee onto the counter. "Sorry." He didn't flinch, didn't scold. He just reached for a napkin, dabbing the spill with that same steady calm that seemed to define everything he did. "It's fine," he said quietly, almost like he hadn't noticed my fumbling at all. But when his gaze flicked up to meet mine, dark, unreadable, lingering for half a beat too long, I knew he had. And that was worse, because it meant he saw. The rest of the morning was a blur. I sat across from him at the table, pretending to scroll through my phone, pretending I didn't notice the way his forearms tensed when he lifted his mug, pretending I didn't hear the quiet sound of him clearing his throat when the silence stretched too long. It should have been nothing. A normal morning, a normal gesture, but it wasn't. The way his fingers brushed mine stayed with me long after he left the room, buzzing under my skin like a secret I wasn't ready to admit. And that was the problem, wasn't it? It wasn't just the coffee, or the silence, or the way he looked too good in the morning light. It was the way he made the ordinary feel dangerous. The days blurred after that, every morning another small test of my composure. Sometimes he'd hand me the mug. Sometimes he'd set it on the counter, letting me take it without contact. But either way, I found myself hyper-aware of every movement, every word, every unspoken thing hanging in the air between us. And in the quiet moments, the ones where the cicadas hummed outside and the house felt too big for just the two of us, I started asking myself questions I didn't want the answers to. Why did I notice the way he rolled up his sleeves, veins catching the light? Why did his voice sound heavier when he said my name, like he was testing how it fit in his mouth? And why? Why did the briefest brush of his fingers feel more intimate than anything I'd experienced before? It was dangerous. It was wrong. It was inevitable. One morning, I came down later than usual. Sunlight was already spilling through the blinds, painting golden lines across the kitchen floor. I expected him to be gone, maybe off to work, maybe asleep after one of his late nights. But he was there, not in his usual place at the counter, not with a newspaper or coffee. He was standing by the window, looking out into the yard, one hand braced against the frame, the other holding a half-empty mug. The early light cut across his shoulders, highlighting the lines of his body in a way that made me stop in my tracks. He turned at the sound of my footsteps. Our eyes met. For a second, just a second, it felt like the air thinned, like the world narrowed to just that look. Then he cleared his throat, setting the mug down. "You sleep all right?" I nodded, though the lie caught in my chest. "Yeah, fine." He studied me, quiet, his expression unreadable. Then he gestured toward the counter where a fresh pot of coffee waited, made enough for two. My lips parted to thank him, but the words tangled in my throat, because what I wanted to say wasn't thank you. It was, why are you doing this? It was, do you feel it too? Instead, I poured myself a mug, hand shaking slightly as I lifted it. His gaze followed me the whole time, and I couldn't help but think, this wasn't just coffee anymore. This was something else. Something brewing between us, stronger than caffeine, impossible to ignore. That's how mornings became unbearable. Not because they were empty, but because they were full of glances, of brushes of skin, of silence heavy enough to drown in. And deep down, I knew mornings were only the beginning. That's when I started noticing the little things. The way his laugh was low, almost reluctant when I made a dumb joke. The way his shirt clung to his back when he worked in the yard. The way he sometimes stared too long before catching himself. BL tropes love tension, the kind that builds slowly until even silence feels loud. One evening, the storm hit. The sky had been threatening it all day, clouds rolling in, dark and swollen, swallowing what little light remained. By nightfall, the rain came down in sheets, hammering against the wide windows, the sound so loud it felt like the entire house was sinking beneath waves. Thunder cracked, deep and violent, shaking the walls and echoing through the long, empty halls. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in blinding white for half a heartbeat before plunging it back into shadow. I sat curled on the couch, textbook open in my lap, pen resting uselessly between my fingers. To anyone else, I might have looked studious, focused, absorbed in equations that blurred across the page, but in reality, I wasn't studying at all. I was waiting, listening, for him. When the door creaked open, I almost jumped. He walked in, framed by the dim light from the hallway. His hair was damp, strands clinging stubbornly to his forehead, as if the storm had followed him inside. Droplets still clung to the rolled-up sleeves of his shirt, and the fabric was plastered to his chest, outlining the shape of him in ways that made my throat go dry. He pushed the wet strands from his eyes with one hand, exhaling slowly. And then he looked at me. Just looked. And in that look, something passed between us. A small acknowledgement, a spark. He tossed me a smile, faint but unmistakable. The kind that said he noticed me, noticing him. The kind that made my stomach twist in knots. "You look nervous," he said at last, voice cutting through the storm's roar. "Storms," I lied. Too quickly, too easily. My pen scratched against the page as if I were mid-note, as if I hadn't been staring at him since the moment he walked in. His smile lingered, but he didn't press. He never pressed. That was what made it worse, the way he gave me room, space, only to close it himself in the next breath. Because instead of retreating to his study, instead of vanishing upstairs, he came closer. And then he sat beside me. Too close. Close enough that the warmth of his body pushed against mine, even with inches of air between us. Close enough that the storm outside faded into a muffled backdrop, replaced by the sharper, more dangerous awareness of him. I tried to breathe, but the air was thick. The scent of him clung to it, rainwater on skin, the faint remnants of cologne he hadn't refreshed since morning, the undeniable warmth of someone alive, present, real. And then came the silence. Not the peaceful kind, not the easy quiet I'd felt in the house before he arrived. No, this silence was heavy, tense. A silence that asked questions without words, a silence that dared me to answer. Another crash of thunder rattled the glass, and I flinched too sharply, too visibly, his head tilted toward me, brows knitting just slightly. "You really don't like storms, do you?" I should have doubled down on the lie, should have nodded, looked away, buried myself in my textbook. But instead, my eyes betrayed me, flicking to his, holding there for just a second too long. The truth was, I wasn't afraid of the storm outside. I was afraid of the one building here, between us. He leaned back, his shoulder brushing the edge of the cushion. So casual, so effortless. And yet, every inch of me was hyper-aware of the space we shared. My pen slipped from my hand, clattering softly to the floor. I bent to grab it, but so did he. Our hands collided beneath the couch, skin against skin. This time, there was no mistaking it, no brushing by accident. This was contact, direct, warm, immediate. I froze, my fingers curling instinctively against his before jerking back, as though burned. His hand lingered a moment longer, then withdrew, pen held between his fingers. He placed it gently on the open page of my notebook, his expression unreadable. But when his eyes met mine again, there was something in them, something sharp, something dangerous. Thunder growled in the distance, and still neither of us moved. I should have said something, anything, but the words tangled in my throat, caught between fear and want. Because what was there to say? That I couldn't stop noticing the way his shirt clung to his chest, that the storm wasn't what made me nervous, that every moment near him felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for gravity to pull me over. No, those weren't words I could say, not to him. So instead, I sat there, motionless, pretending to study while my pulse raced loud enough to drown out the storm itself. And he sat beside me, unmoving, eyes fixed on the pages I wasn't reading. That silence again, heavy, dangerous, and I knew, with a certainty that both terrified and thrilled me, that sooner or later, something would break. Ryan talks about you a lot, he said finally. Says you're practically family. Family. The word stung. It was supposed to draw a line. Instead, it made me want to cross it. I swallowed hard. And what do you think? His eyes locked on mine, unreadable. Then softer. I think, you're not a kid anymore. The room tilted, my breath hitched, and then nothing. He stood, leaving me with a storm inside louder than the one outside. That's how it went. Push and pull, lingering glances, almost touches, unsaid words. Every BL webtoon moment lined up like panels in a manhwa. Until the night everything cracked open. It was late. The house was quiet. I couldn't sleep. I wandered into the kitchen for water, only to find him already there, sitting in the dark with a half-empty glass. Couldn't sleep? He asked, voice low. I shook my head. My throat was dry, but not from thirst. He studied me for a moment, then said, "This isn't right." My chest tightened. What isn't? Me, you, this, tension. His hand tightened around the glass. You're Ryan's best friend. I should have agreed. I should have walked away. But BL stories thrive on moments like this, when the truth demands to be spoken. So I whispered, "Then why can't you stop looking at me?" The glass hit the counter. His hand trembled. And then he was standing, closing the distance in 3 long strides. "Alex," he said. My name like a warning. Or maybe a plea. I didn't move. Neither did he. We just stood there, breathing the same air, until finally, he leaned in. Not a kiss, not yet, but close enough that I could feel his breath on my skin, warm and trembling. It wasn't right. It wasn't simple. But in that moment, it was inevitable. Whisper tone. That was the night everything changed. The next morning, the world looked the same. Coffee mugs, quiet hallways, rain still dripping from the roof. But nothing between us was the same. We didn't say the word love. We didn't define what happened. But the glances grew softer, the silences warmer. When Ryan's family returned, I packed my bag and left like nothing happened. But as I closed the door behind me, I felt his gaze on my back, heavy, longing, unspoken. This wasn't the end of a story, just the beginning of one too complicated to name. That's what BL romances are. Not neat, not perfect, but unforgettable. So, what do you think? Was this story sweet, emotional, or forbidden? Comment your reaction below. I read every word. And if you want more BL webtoon stories, yaoi manhwa romances, and dramatic love plots, subscribe now. Check the description for more BL recommendations.